Hi everyone, this is John. I'm back with another book review today for you. I'll talk about that in a second. It's Tuesday. I think what I'm going to do with the sort of renaissance of my channel is make Tuesday my book review release days. And try to just force myself to get out one review a week. I think it's nice that I put myself on a schedule, so instead of just releasing them willy-nilly, I'll have a definite schedule, and maybe that benefits you somehow, but at least it lets me know when I need to get on track and actually prepare a review. So if you're interested in having a sort of more scheduled, formalized plan like that, or if you don't care, you're more than welcome to let me know in the comments. The book I want to talk about today, as you can tell from the title, I always put it in the title, is From Democrats to Kings: The Brutal Dawn of a New World, From the Downfall of Athens to the Rise of Alexander the Great, by Michael Scott. Michael Scott, by the way, is an Englishman, and the English publication has, I believe, the same title but a different subtitle. It's a bit shorter. It has the words, I think, A Brutal Age or something, and also a different cover, I think. But this is the American edition. From Democrats to Kings arose from an idea that Scott had when he was asked by Cambridge University to come and give a series of lectures which would complement what Cambridge, I think it was Magdalen College, Cambridge, already had on its roster. So they didn't want him to talk about what they already had, but really to sort of complement something that was already there and make a course out of it. So what they already had on schedule was a class on classical democratic 5th century BC Athens, and they had a class on what had happened post Alexander, the rise of sort of Hellenistic Greece, and basically what Greece had become under the tyrants, under the kings. So that basically leaves an obvious gap. You have what happened in the 5th century, you have what happened in the 3rd, so it's a natural fit to sort of describe what happened in the 4th century. And indeed, this book is basically an arc of the transition from democracy in Greece to, at the end, we're going to see the 30 tyrants, which are instituted by Sparta on Athens at the end of the Peloponnesian War in 404. And it's all about that roughly 80-year span during the 4th century in which all of this happens. There is, at least according to him, who of course would be much more familiar with the literature than I am, there is a bit of a lacuna in the scholarly and the popular literature about this period in history. So not only does this gap exist in Magdalen College's history curriculum, but also apparently for the mostly general reader, that there's not much about this time period out there either. So as far as the content of the book, after the Spartan defeat of Athens, at the conclusion of the Peloponnesian War, like I said, the Spartans installed the 30 tyrants to reign over Athens. But that only lasted for about 8 months before they were eventually dissolved. In the meantime, you sort of get the idea that even Spartan allies like the city of Thebes were getting sort of sick of its hegemonic rule. And you get the sense that Persia is really doing anything to keep its grip on on Asia Minor, which happens to be where Greece has a lot of city-states located. So all of these phenomena coming together, which of course he describes in much more detail in the book, but you get these three things coming together that increasingly add to a sense of instability, strife, tumult, that used to not be there in 5th century democratic Greece. So over the course of the 4th century, you see sort of more worry, more angst, more strife, and an increasing number of sort of disjointed cities. The cities lose their sense of community and togetherness, and they sort of fall apart. So what this does is this really sets the stage for Philip II of Macedon to come in and basically he does make some major military progress, but the biggest thing Philip II does is he completely reforms the military, and he lays the ground for his son, who you probably know of as Alexander the Great, Alexander III of Macedon, to basically come in and build an empire that stretches from Afghanistan to Greece to Thrace. It was basically back then the complete known world. If not the vast, vast majority of what ancient people knew to be the known world that Alexander had control over. His father was extremely instrumental, but perhaps wasn't the military genius his son was, but definitely, like I said, laid the way to make all the progress and all the military advancement that his son actually made. So, the way Scott tells the story of the book, it's a bit of a mishmash, I would say, between intellectual, cultural, and social history, but there's also a really heavy dose of military history thrown in there. In fact, for the first third of the book, it was quite a bit of military history. Not a long book by any stretch of the imagination, about 250 pages, but as someone myself who does not really derive much pleasure from reading military history, I don't really get a lot out of detailed explanations of what was happening on this day at this hour to this regiment. That sort of lost my interest. There are occasional excursions into the meaning, like the social and cultural meaning of the Greek theater and things like that, that are more interesting to a reader like me. But the military history does sort of pop in and out of focus depending on where you are in the book. And just keep that in mind. If you are a reader who likes military history, you, especially if you like a mixture of all of those things, you might really gravitate toward this book, especially if you are new to the period. I think personally, what the general reader could really benefit from is a book that takes up the same time period and the same subject, but knows how to really make a better balance of the scholarly nature of the history with an engaging narrative. The narrative is a bit jumpy because of the kind of history the kinds of histories that it's trying to tell. In such a short book, when you're juggling between military and cultural and social history, it can seem a bit choppy and disjointed, and I think that's what ends up happening here. Unfortunately, I found that the book industry, especially in books about history, and especially books about ancient Roman history, something either needs to be really, really super detailed, or something needs to be really long and include all of the Greek or the Roman world, and there doesn't seem to be much of a middle path, I would love to see something a lot more of along a little path, maybe about twice this long and more, maybe more of a governmental or diplomatic kind of history than as much military. But you meet some interesting people along the way. You meet some fascinating characters. The time was a really interesting one, needless to say, to live in, even if you probably wouldn't have wanted to live through it yourself. I just think that there's probably something better out there for anyone who's interested in the time period and place, no matter what level you're entering in your reading, whether you're a neophyte or certainly a scholar, I guess, would not be interested in something like this. But I ended up giving this on Goodreads for what it's worth. Those who still use the star system, I figure it tells some people something. I ended up giving it 3 out of 5. I was going between 2 and 3 and landed on 3. So there you go. That is my critique of From Democrats to Kings, The Brutal Dawn of a New World, From the Downfall of Athens to the Rise of Alexander the Great, by Michael Scott. Until next Tuesday, guys. Bye.